Hello, good time zone appropriate greeting to you, and welcome to What the Trans.
What the trans?
Yes, What the Trans, a relatively new podcast by and for the trans community, looking out for all of the wonderful stuff produced by, for, and against us. Some of it's not all that wonderful, actually. So I'm Ashley Talbot.
I'm Michelle O'Toole.
So how are you, Michelle?
I'm good. I guess I've got to start by apologising for the pod being a day late. Machine hates humans.
Machine does hate humans, and that's, that was very annoying when we discovered that. But never mind. Let's just get on with the show, shall we? So first up, terrible news. So in this segment, we look at all the news that's been taking place, and in any given week, there's a lot of coverage about the trans community. Some of it's good, and some of it is kind of less than good, really. But this week seems to be a stats week, which always gets my back up slightly, because wasn't there someone who was quite famously quoted by saying that, the three worst things in language or discourse are lies, damned lies, and statistics. So we've got to be careful how we handle these. But first up, information that probably won't surprise anybody, which is that 1 in 3 employers in the UK are less likely to employ a trans person, according to a poll commissioned by Crossland Employment Solicitors. So Crossland asked 1,000 employers from across different industries about their views on employing trans people, and the results were not at all encouraging. 33% of employees consider themselves less likely to employ a trans person, and 43% are unsure if they would employ a trans person. So we've got a bit more information about this, drilling down into the statistics a little more, but what do you think of this, Michelle?
I think it's a brilliant thing. I think there should be more uncertainty about whether they should employ us. No, of course I don't think it's a good thing, Ash. So I'm looking for a job right now. I'm just going to say it. On my CV, I don't hide the fact that I'm trans. I don't run into these places, with a banner screaming, "This bitch is trans, yo." But, I do this show. I put this show on the CV. It's pretty obvious that I'm trans once you read it, so they're going to know before I go into the door. And when I don't hear from someone, of course, you don't hear from most people you apply for. They just don't send you anything. But there's niggling doubt. And then with stuff with customer service roles and stuff, which I've also had to go through, at different times. I have had the thing where they've said, well, you seem nice, but we don't know how we take, that. And when they say that, they do the pointing at me. And I'm like, well, this is technically, kind of breaking the law, what you're saying right now, but there's no way I can prove it. Employment discrimination law's all lovely on paper, but how am I supposed to how am I supposed to challenge this in any real way? So it's a horrible state of affairs.
Yeah, it is, and obviously this is definitely one of the problems, whereby it's kind of like a covert kind of discrimination, where it's it's not us. It's not us that we're worried about. We'd love to employ a trans person, but we just don't know how the customers would take it, and it's they're enabling bigotry by doing that kind of thing. And incidentally, progressively minded employers who may be listening, if you'd like a copy of Michelle's CV, then please do get in touch at What the Trans on Twitter and so on and so forth. But
damn straight, I am a goddamn peach to work with. I can make a cracking cup of tea, and I'm only habitually 20 minutes late for work every day.
I'm sure that's something that could be improved with time. But speaking of employers, right? So the worst offenders, seemingly, are so the retail sector has overall 47% of retail sector employees are unlikely to employ trans people. Okay, 45% of IT employees describe it as unlikely, and that's 35% in leisure and hospitality, and down to 34% in manufacturing. So seemingly, financial services are the most open-minded about this, because only 34% describe themselves as agreeable to the idea, 33% in the legal sector, and 25% in construction and engineering. And so just 3% of the 1,000 employers polled from all industries, apparently, had an equal opportunities employee that openly welcomes transgender people to apply for a job.
That lines up with my experience, because I sort of scroll down to the bottom of job listings and stuff, just do they have the Stonewall stamp? Do they have something there? And they tend not to. And that,
yeah,
they don't have to have that, but I would like to see that more, because just be like, oh, well, I have a shot at this job. I think you were onto something when you were saying that they're sort of pushing away the responsibility for standing up to bigotry. In one of the stats from this, it says 4% of respondents declared that their workplace culture is liberal and diverse enough for trans people to fit in. And it's what I really don't get from this is that I get the impression that these employers are just they look at their workplace culture just oh no, I don't think a trans person could fit in here. Oh well, there's nothing can be done. That's how it is. There's nothing I can do. That's it. I can't change it. And it's like, you can change it.
You're in charge.
You can change your workplace culture. Even the little things. Yeah, just show them a fantastic woman one night, you know? Like, just, you know, you could do something.
It's not even necessarily coming from a place of malice, I think. It's just from well, you know, we're not sure and we're not that bothered about finding out, so we're just going to... So it's all rather dispiriting in a way, but it's not surprising, I think.
I think the hopeful thing to take away from this is that, like, the Crossland Employment Solicitors actually did the survey in the first place.
Yeah, I suppose so.
And that made the news. That's how we found out about it. Well, that's how, you know, we found out about it. So people are reporting on it, and this knowledge is getting out there now. People are starting to know the realities of this stuff. So hopefully that will be the start of a change, I hope.
Fingers crossed. But then I also, you know, my inner statistics person is just like, okay, so they only asked 1,000 employers out of however many tens of, if hundreds of thousands of employers that there are in the UK. I don't know. It depends on the companies that they've asked, doesn't it? Because if, you know, you've got one company or it's like a cluster of companies that just aren't doing anything at all, that's going to drag the average right down, isn't it? Anyway, so let's move on, shall we?
Yes, let's move on. I've got another poll here for you, Ash. It's so many polls, Ash. It's so many surveys.
Yay, polls. Love it. Okay, go on. What's this one?
According to a survey conducted by YouGov and Pride in London, the great British public care more about animal rights than LGBT rights.
Right.
In the poll, 7% of straight respondents said that they were concerned about animal rights, which I'm surprised in itself, that's not higher. But only 3% were concerned about, you know, the LGBT. Only 3% were concerned about LGBT rights, which, that is surprising to me, because I thought that, like, I don't know, I thought that would be in the 10% myself, but I think I'm too optimistic at some times.
But again, I mean, it depends how many people have been polled for this, doesn't it? Because if they've even asked 100 people, then the average of actual LGBT people within that 100 is going to be higher than 3%. You know? Like, if 1 in every 10 is, that's 10 people, so what, are these people hiding themselves in polls? I don't know. It just, again, it seems a little bit low. Particularly, this is, as you say, been commissioned by Pride in London, but it was a nationwide study, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it had about 200 or 300 people responded. But then it's also, the problem with a lot of these polls is that they are also the kind of, they poll entirely the kind of people who will reply to an email.
Yeah. Just any old email, really.
So who knows who these people are? But then I think that if we take these things as broad strokes, like, I've been around many people who have just had this conversation. Oh, do you think, like, gay rights and all that and trans rights are a thing anymore? No, not really. They can get married. I met a trans person once and they smiled once, so that's probably it. Job done. Pat on the back. Pass around the olives.
Well done, everybody. Well done, team. Yeah, and we're sort of obviously totally not done yet, are we? And there's some other numbers in this gosh darn poll. Like, so 44% of people who were LGBT who responded to this. So 44% of them said that they were concerned about tolerance towards LGBT people. So that's nearly half of all of the LGBT folks that have been polled in this big thing. Potentially big, I don't know. Again, don't know how many respondents there were, but that's who are legitimately concerned about the tolerance that is, you know, not completely present in the UK. Sadly, people say, oh, you know, it's a very open, tolerant society, but it's about more than sort of tolerating, you know? It's about actually being able to fully participate in public life, which when trans people are encountering such barriers in the workplace and in so many other areas, that's not something that we're really able to do.
I can only speculate as to why, like, the 44% number is a lot lower than I thought, but I don't know, maybe for a lot of the LGB, or mostly the L and the G, maybe the things have gotten so much better that they don't have those ongoing concerns anymore. I mean, I've not met those people. You know, I actually know far more, like, gay and lesbian people than I do trans people, and they still have concerns in my circle, but that's anecdotal versus data, so, you know, who gives a crap about that?
Yeah, indeed. Certainly these pollsters, no, we love us some raw numbers, don't we? So let's move on to another set of shitty numbers, which is another silly study. Well, it's not necessarily a silly study, actually. I think it's got a legitimate point, but it seems to us to be a little bit obvious. So we think it's from the same people who figured out that water is wet and that chocolate is delicious, because apparently queer women don't feel welcome at Pride events. So Her, which is a dating app for lesbian, bisexual and queer femmes, just released the results of their poll, which claims that 31% of women don't feel comfortable at a Pride event. This is even worse for bisexual women, 43%, and worse again for self-identified queer women is at 53%. So apparently the head of marketing at her did an interview with Broadly, which is on Vice, and she thinks the problem might be male-centric nature of a lot of LGBT events, and they're not focused on queer women specifically, or indeed the LGBT community more broadly. And she said, it's a cycle. I think it's a cycle where women will go to these events, not see many other women there, and not go back a second time. So yeah, this is a bit sort of depressing, but also not something I find terribly surprising.
I've sort of got two weird takes on this. Basically, I love Pride. I love the crap out of Pride. Whenever somebody says to me, like, oh, Pride's done, or oh, Pride has gone too corporate and all of that, I tend to agree with them to an extent, but I still go to Pride. I still love it, because there are times at Pride's trans or full letter salad Pride, you know, all varieties of Pride. There are these moments where the tension that I carry in myself going out into, you know, the hetero, cis, normal world that is gone, that I forget sometimes is even there. And I look around, and I see loads of people like me, or at the very least people who are in the same rough genre of me, and I'm just like, yes. And that is a feeling that I am thoroughly addicted to and love.
Yes.
But it's not as easy for me to get that feeling as it is for certain other people in the community, I don't think.
Yay!
Well, there is one good thing that's happening this year that I noticed, and also was pointed out by Barbara Galina when the head of marketing for her, when she was doing an interview with Vice. She pointed out that London Pride and other places are trying to address this problem. Like, there's going to be a women's stage this year right in the middle of Soho, and it's actually my birthday weekend is Pride in London this year. So, and you will find a very drunk, slurry version of me, I'm sure, by the women's stage, just yelling, "I found my people! I found my people!" So yeah, come say hello and, you know, shove me in an Uber if I look like I need it.
Okay, enough of the polls.
Yeah, I'm done with the polls. Fuck the polls. Like, I'm a person like me who is, and I say this with the most like self-love I can, I am an idiot, Ash. I should not have any reason to know what quantitative data is, but I kind of do now.
Yes.
And I think there's something wrong with the world where someone like me knows that. But anyway, let's get away from the fucking polls and move on to the fucking High Court.
Okay, and this is just to clarify, please don't take the fuck the polls thing and put it into like an anti-Polish video out of context on YouTube. Absolutely, we think Poland is amazing.
Well, of course they're going to do that now, Ash. That's it. This is... Oh.
Is it game over for us? Yes, anyway, go on. The shitty High Court. The shitty High Court, then. What the devil have they been up to?
Basically, this week, the High Court has ruled in favour of the government and announced that their refusal to issue gender-neutral passports is not unlawful. The case got to the High Court after a 25-year fight from activist Christy Ellen Cain, who wants passports to have an X category, which I think is something all trans people want, even if they do not identify as non-binary.
So they do it in one or two other countries as well, don't they? So there's Canada and Australia, Denmark, Germany, Malta, New Zealand, Pakistan, India, Ireland, and Nepal all do it, don't they? But we don't.
That's only maybe a combined population of like over 1 billion people.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. It doesn't matter. It's just a drop in the ocean. Rounding error.
And like the ICAO, the UN agency that regulates international travel, like they're fine with it. They've put in place things to allow these things, but then Justice Jeremy Baker decided that right now the UK government's policy on it isn't unlawful. So let me break down like the very, very brief arguments, because I read the whole judgment, all 45 pages of it.
The things you do for pod.
The things I do for pod, although to be honest, I quite enjoyed this one because I don't know, I got that thing, I was reading it on my phone on the train, I'm just like, I'm reading a judge's decision. I'm like a lawyer or something. Christy Ellen Cain's arguments that were put across by her solicitors are basically almost entirely about the European Convention of Human Rights and how the government refusing to issue the passports with an X marker and a gender is in conflict with Article 8 of the ECHR, which is the right to a private and family life. And the idea is that Ellen Cain's gender identity is a part of their private life, but also goes against Article 14 to not be discriminated against. And they also made the very good point that every time Ellen Cain goes for a passport, they have to lie about who they are, which is a crime.
Yeah.
But it's a crime that they can't not commit if they want to get a passport. And also, you know, how psychologically it's crushing to have to be like, oh, I'm a man or I'm a woman when you are neither, you know? Like, I think everyone listening to this knows how much that fucking sucks. But the arguments against Christie Ellen Kane, and in favour of the government, the Home Office and the Passport Office specifically, did this weird thing where they were like, we don't think that these count as an interference in Ellen Kane's life. But if they are an interference, they're a justifiable one for reasons of security, combating identity theft, and a whole lot of other things like that, which basically sum up to, we don't want to change our computer because it will cost a lot of money and it would be really, really confusing, even though many other countries have done so already. So I don't think, from my layperson's perspective, it didn't necessarily add up. But Jeremy Barker, the judge who decided on the case, did not agree. But then reading his judgment, and how it was concluded at the end, basically the way he saw it was that, as it stands, he agrees with the government that these do not necessarily, from a legal standpoint only, count as unlawful for the denying the passport to Ellen Kane. But he also made a big point of saying that he didn't have enough information about it because the consultation has not been completed that the government are currently going through to look at this issue. So he very much said, right now this is the situation, but it could be subject to change for a number of reasons. So I don't think Jeremy Barker in himself, you know, was sat there as a bit of a bigot, just being like, well, I don't believe in any of this, so I'm going to vote with the government. He was very much all the way through the judgment writing about how he understood transgender issues, he understood gender issues, he understood how disappointing his judgment would be, and he at least showed that he knew what he was talking about, and he went with a decision because of how the law and how other court cases that are unrelated but set precedents apply to this case. So there is hope for the future on this.
There is. So obviously we'll be keeping up with the story of Christie Ellen Kane, waiting to see what they do next in terms of their appeal, if they're going to continue, but we'd be interested to see, and we'd love to see the government introduce a non-gender specific marker on a passport like the X, as many other countries do. But now, let us move on, yes?
Yes.
Yes, like Alex's teacher in A Clockwork Orange, isn't it? There was some nastiness last night, yes? The only one who wants to save you from yourself. Anyway, so it has been revealed that the BBC is going to be installing gender-neutral toilets in all of its buildings, and has begun planning better ways to support trans employees, and is looking to introduce paid GRS cover in the very near future. Hooray! Jolly well done, chaps.
That's fantastic.
But, obviously, critical as I am of everything, I've got to point out that if the BBC want to do something to really support transgender people, and perhaps not just the ones that they employ, they could stop doing so much coverage which is really, really hostile to trans people. That might be quite nice if they were to stop featuring these insane purported feminist people who don't have any kind of level of evidence base, and placing that opposite someone who might actually be saying something quite reasonable and claiming that that is a balanced debate.
So we should have the HR people sort of take over the editorial decisions from the BBC News section.
I think somebody needs to get fired in the BBC News section, somebody who is not doing a very good job of staying unbiased. There might be several somebodies, I've no idea, but the point is the fact that while they're doing this and saying, oh look, aren't we a good employer, while also on the other hand you've got things constantly going out on the Today programme, whatever else, that are just entirely hostile to the trans community with no good reason, with no justifiable journalistic backing. It's like, well, one of those things is slightly more important than the other for the wider trans community, although obviously gender neutral and trans employees at the BBC, I am quite certain, are very delighted about this, and rightly so.
Do you want to hear the Christian Institute's take on all this?
Oh, the Christian Institute, what have they been up to?
Well, basically, this news came out from the BBC because of a Ofcom report into the radio industry called Radio Industry Must Tune In for Diversity. And they came up with a load of numbers that the Christian Institute did not like. For example, 8% of BBC employees identify as LGBT or somewhere in the mix. And the Christian Institute have taken that as a sign. The BBC is hiring way too many LGBT-ers, Ash. They're just hiring way too many, and maybe that they should get some Christian voices in. Kieran Kelly said that this was further evidence of the BBC's obsession with political correctness, and if the BBC was as concerned with accurately reflecting the UK population as it claims to be, they would be actively recruiting Christians. Such voices are in very short supply in their offices, while those pushing radical agendas on gender and sexuality are massively overrepresented.
Yeah, I was thinking about this though after we sort of decided the stories we were going to do, and if they wanted to actively recruit Christians, that's not a good idea because most of the people really who are the sort of Christians that the Christian Institute are thinking of are actually quite shortly to retire or have retired a long time ago. So, is that really the pool of talent that you want to be drawing a lot of your voices from? The sort of mostly senile element of society who are rabidly Christian? I don't think those people would actually make very good broadcast. You know, I just get the impression that wouldn't really come up.
You see the Christian Institute show up at London Pride every year. They usually have like 5 or 6 people just hemmed in to the side because they're legally allowed to protest the thing, but they try and keep them off the beaten track behind this barrier. They have police there, and they just have these old signs that they bring out every year, and they don't appear to have the charisma that is required for the creation of media content, is what I will say. Like they do not, there's no Terry Wogans in that group, and they wear like proper tweed in the middle of July, and they just look so grumpy, surrounded by like a million people, all joyously celebrating human diversity in all of its forms. And it's just they're the people you want to put. They're the people you want presenting Match of the Day. Really, they're the people.
Yeah, bunch of jackasses, and that's why we can probably. That's why I look forward to the Christian Institute giving us plenty more material to work with over the coming months. So yes, moving on.
Fair enough. Basically, the Conservative Secretary of State for International Development and the new Minister for Women and Equalities, Penny Mordaunt, has announced that transphobia is like 80s homophobia and has reaffirmed the government's position that more needs to be done to help transgender people without going into detail of what they're going to do. And if you don't mind, I'll give a little context of how of where she made these comments. Basically, this is an evidence gathering session from the Women and Equalities Committee, basically called because the job of Minister for Women and Equalities has had like 3 different people in it over the last like 18 months. And Maria Miller MP, who's also head of the Women and Equalities Committee, she was like, so you keep changing the job around. Are you going to get any of our recommendations made a few years ago about trans people done anytime soon? And whilst the words that Mordaunt used were very positive, she didn't actually answer any of those questions. She was in there for 2 hours. So it's a very mixed news. So whilst it's amazing that a minister of this government, of a Conservative government, seems to be acknowledging the struggles that trans people have, it was very much probably an answer that didn't really mean that much when it comes to actual policy.
Yeah, but it was an event of rhetoric, wasn't it? Because what Mordaunt has said was great, you know, it just in its own terms. Like, for example, you know, there's one quote that I thought was particularly good, which is, "We need to address people's concerns, but fundamentally, I think that discrimination and bigotry is very much like what gay men faced in the 1980s. None of us were in politics at the time, but if we were, would we have stood up for that community?" And, you know, I'm kind of pleased that she asked that question in that company. But then she went on to say that that's happening now to the trans community, and we really need to show leadership and really ensure that misleading information, unpleasant things on social media, or lectures or videos that are being broadcast are called out for what they are. I feel very strongly about that. As do we, which is super, but actions speak louder than words, don't they? And as you say, there were a number of recommendations, some of which, as far as I'm concerned, honestly didn't go far enough, but had they implemented them in a timely fashion, you know, we'd be talking about those now instead of still waiting for this other stuff that's actually reasonably basic. So those recommendations came in 2016, I think.
They did the whole thing in 2015, and then they released it like first half of 2016. Their decisions and their recommendations.
Yeah, and it's like, you know, what's taking so long with this, honestly, and who is it that you're listening to when you're not just following the advice of literally everybody that you've asked and implementing the things that have been suggested? So
I'm thinking about it a bit more. Like, you know, Brexit happened, and you know, all of the haters coming out of the woodwork and doing their stunts and stuff. Like, I guess there's an argument to be said that like it's not like that they haven't had their plate full, but at the same time, fucking do something, you know? Just like,
people have been asking them about this for a long time. Yeah,
things kind of suck right now.
People have been asking about this for a long time.
Yeah, very long time.
Just,
yeah.
Anyway, so we're just gonna. Again, this is one of those things that we watch, we wait, and we hope that someday soon we'll get to say, "Oh, yes, that's good. I'm looking forward to that." So we shall see. But we're going to sort of come back to governmental and media fund games on that very subject very soon. But first, we have a couple of stories about dicks talking bollocks. So first up, a bunch of idiots are freaking out over the Inclusive Cancer Research campaign. So Cancer Research UK have tweeted, cervical screening, or the smear test, is relevant for everyone aged 25 to 64 with a cervix. Watch our animation to find out what to expect when you go for screening. Hashtag Cervical Screening Awareness Week. And everybody lost their fucking minds, okay? So the responses on social media were pretty special. A couple of them were saying, oh, I can't believe you'd pander to the trans community, the trans ideology like this. I'm going to stop giving money to cancer research. And it's like, that is a really long-term cutting off of a nose to spite a face, isn't it? That's some long-term thinking in terms of spitefulness. I'm kind of impressed in a way. But like, Jesus, they're just making the language more inclusive. What on earth is the problem?
Yeah, like if I saw that tweet, I wouldn't necessarily even think of the trans angle on that. It would just be people with a cervix. Like, you know, like it doesn't jump up as somebody saying, and of trans people also. It's just a tweet. It's just enough. It's a cancer research. It's cancer research tweeting about ways to stop getting cancer or find cancer early. Like, it's not. My mind boggles. It's just dicks talking bollocks about cervix.
It's nonsense, isn't it? Well, let's crack on with the next one of these, because honestly, this one, if you thought that was just stupid, this one is even better, right? Because a meeting of people who do not like to be called TERFs, but are definitely TERFs, apparently blaming trans people for turning fish trans, right?
My God, they're onto us. Our plan to give all the fish tits is out, Ash. Oh my God.
We're going to have to think of something else. Quickly, let's give octopuses penises instead of tentacles. So this came up at a meeting held by none other than Venice Allen and her particular group of hangers-on. So an activist identified only as Elizabeth made the claim, right? So a part of this series of We Need to Talk talks, where the only thing they really talk about is how much trans people suck. A woman referred to as Elizabeth claimed that another thing that really breaks my kind of heart is estrogenic pollution, which is that because of trans and because of HRT, we're peeing a lot of estrogen, synthetic estrogen, into the water, and that's forcibly transing the fish. And that means that the crocodiles and alligators are in danger. It means freshwater fish are in danger. It means we're destroying the world because of the trans ideology. So it... yeah. I mean,
sorry.
I know I don't want to jump in over a laugh here, but I'm sorry, I'm not yet done. And so she went on to say, it reaches into a lot of things that don't seem immediately connected. Yeah, well, there's a really, really good reason why it seems that way. So let's do our homework and start planning on that front as well. Yeah, so yes, please, Elizabeth, do some homework, right? Like, just look at anything, or like watch one of the recent David Attenborough documentaries, perhaps. Trans fish are a thing, it turns out. But we here at the podcast think that Elizabeth read one of the reports on a study back in 2017 in July that claimed that 20% of freshwater fish have feminine characteristics due to over 200 different chemicals from sewage plants, as well as a load of different types of medication being flushed down the toilet. So that includes antidepressants, various birth control medications. So she's taken this study, this report that was done, and gone, trans people are giving fish tits. This cannot stand.
Well, it just shows more about, like, this particular group of people. Like, they are looking for any stick to beat trans with, even if that stick is made of nonsense and bullshit. Like this person clearly just read that report somewhere, like, a year ago, and was like, saw estrogen in the report and was like, yes, I can use this. And then waited for a chance to talk in front of people. And then she got the invite, went down to the place, and she made her point. And she must have been so proud to be the only person in the world to make this connection.
Genius.
She's a goddamn genius.
Yes, well.
But the whole, like, these people do these meetings every few weeks. But yeah, like, on their Facebook group, I looked through, like, when I was researching this, and they have these, like, 2-3 hour long videos. It's just really badly filmed, just like, there's a table with a bunch of people sat there. And not only is it horrendous the stuff they come out with, but it's the most boring garbage you've ever made in your life.
Not even made it interesting.
Yeah, like, with a lot of, like, the haters out there, like, you know, with your far-right people, who are scum of the earth, I mean, that should go without saying, but they know showmanship. Like, they understand how to sell their message. It's just, like, they would be able to come out and just be like, I don't know, black people suck. There, that's succinct. Okay? It's, of course, monstrous, but everyone understands the words they're using in that sentence. And then you got these people just talking for 2 hours about how people are transing fish. And it's like, and they made that boring. We made that more interesting than they could.
Yeah, I know, right?
This thing that is inherently interesting. Like,
and they seem to be obsessed with looking at things from a Marxist perspective as well. And it's like, I think you've catastrophically misunderstood a number of the things to do with Marxism. If you're applying it to this, and also, and also just one or two other things that I'm pretty sure are not in the original text. I might be a little bit wrong about that, but I don't remember the Communist Manifesto specifically talking about non-binary people or about gender reassignment or anything like that. So, whatever.
Anyway, should we move on from these people? Because they are far too boring to talk about any longer, I think.
Yeah, I think we've got enough out of it as it is. So, well, we're going to sort of talk about these people, though, or something, because most recently, so hot off the press, it's still kind of damp and sticky. We had, on June the 24th in the UK, several major Sunday newspapers all carried an article insisting that the government had said trans people don't have the right to use women-only spaces. The only problem with this particular story is that it's not true.
Well, I'm going to admit something. When you first brought this to my attention, I read, like, the response that you're going to talk about now, and I was just like, oh shit, they've U-turned. Like, I fell for it. But I'm not a professional journalist, so I shouldn't know better. But sorry, go on.
I just to point out, I'm not a professional journalist either. I'm just someone with too much time on Sundays. So, but the thing is, like, not even 3 weeks ago, the government once again clarified its position, right? And they said, we're committed to improving the position of trans people and supporting their rights. We're confident that advancing the rights of trans people does not compromise does not compromise women's rights, and we will work with all groups to ensure this. And so they've actually been repeating this quite patiently and variations of it for some time. As we've mentioned, they're doing that and nothing else, but they're still doing that. Yesterday, they reclarified their position as the result of a petition which insisted that cisgender women be given a say in how the proposed reform of the Gender Recognition Act, which is, we believe, due to start quite soon. That petition was rejected, with the government once again reiterating its position of support and, upcoming legal changes for trans people. And for some reason, that has been rewritten by first, I'm not sure if it was the Times or the Mail first, but if it was one of them first, and then everyone else picked it up and repeated it with the same basic headline of trans people. Government says trans people can't do this, and in fact the government have said quite the opposite, and someone's just spun this out in the right way. And now here we are with these extraordinarily misleading headlines, and I'm quite certain that the people behind these headlines were perfectly aware of that, because they, particularly in things like the Mail and the Sun, they positioned it as trans people versus women, right? So that's forgetting trans women, and obviously, as these things always do, it's completely forgetting about trans men. But so it's immediately making it as a kind of this versus this thing, and that, once again, is absolutely not the case. You can be completely trans-inclusive without sidelining the rights of anybody else, and I'm amazed that anybody thinks that that is actually the case. What's happening here is that people are fundamentally mixing up two quite separate things, right? And let me explain to you what they are. I'm sure we'll all be thrilled about that. So, firstly, the two pieces of legislation which are of particular interest and come up in these things a lot are the Gender Recognition Act of 2004 and the Equality Act of 2010. Now, people have been pointing out the problems of the Gender Recognition Act of 2004 for quite some time. What that does, its one and only function, is it allows a trans person to change their birth certificate. So, this is obviously pre-same-sex marriage, and so if somebody who was a trans person who wanted to get married in their, correct gender, had to get their birth certificate changed, there was no standardised way of doing that. So, by making a standardised way of doing it, which incidentally the UK government was forced to do by the European Court of Human Rights, they've insisted, no, we don't need a system for this, we're not going to bother, and the ECHR said, no, actually lads, I think you do. So a court case went through. It was won or lost, depending on which way you want to look at it. And so the government then came out with the General Recognition Act of 2004. So this involves you. Firstly, you have to pay for it. You gather together a lot of evidence, such as bank statements, letters in your appropriate name, statements of address, payslips, and whatever. And documents regarding any medical transition. And all of this is bundled up and sent off to an independent judging panel whom you do not meet. So at no point are you ever in the same room with these people. You don't know who they are, and they are the arbiters of whether you are trans enough to be allowed to change your birth certificate. People have been turned away for these things. People continue to be turned away for these things. No, come back when your evidence is better. And there is no facility within the Gender Recognition Act to recognise somebody such as Christy Ellen Kane, or a non-binary person, or a genderqueer person. There is no, as it were, third option. It is only changing from one to the other, or vice versa, and nothing else. So it's quite obviously we're glad it's there, but it is limiting, and it is humiliating, in fact, for somebody to submit themselves entirely to the judgment of another, who will then judge by a fairly arbitrary set of standards whether you're trans enough. And obviously none of the members of the panel are themselves trans. So that kind of begs the question, what do they know about it in the first place? So, for a long time, the Gender Recognition Act has been criticised, and that is the piece of legislation that the government are planning to open a consultation on in the very near future. The other act that is very important is the Equality Act of 2010, and because it's an Equality Act, it applies to everybody. So in it, there are clauses talking about protected characteristics, things such as race, status as perhaps a wheelchair user, or someone with another level of disability, someone who is gay, who is religious, who is trans, or is a combination of all of those things. Those are protected characteristics. And so, within the Equality Act, one of the provisions is nobody will be prevented from accessing any public service or refused anything at all on the basis of their race or gender reassignment status or sexual orientation or religion or whatever. Now, so it does say in the Equality Act gender reassignment or gender reassignment status, but one of the things that people have pointed out about that is that makes a lot of people, employers perhaps in the real world, assume that only those people, trans people who have had some level of treatment for gender dysphoria, some level of medical intervention, are covered by the Act, and that's actually not the case. It's anybody who has considered it, who has undergone it, or has undergone it in the past, or whatever. It covers everybody, and the Act does make that clear, but the specific form of words that's used is gender reassignment. So that's something that we would like them to update, but the government have said, well, no, we're not going to update that terminology, and also we're not going to change the Equality Act so that trans people get a raw deal, which is what a lot of people are getting mixed up. People are assuming that this consultation that's soon to open is about trans people's right to access public spaces, to great prices, shelters, public bathrooms, and what's actually being consulted on is trans people's right to self-identify, to declare themselves to the world in a legal and meaningful way. And so those two things have been mixed up, and that's what brought out this particular glut of stories on the 24th of June, whereby, where the government have said, no, we're not going to change the Equality Act, has been interpreted by, oh yeah, no, the government says that trans people can be discriminated against in bathrooms. And that's not what's happening. That's not what's happening at all. So people are getting things mixed up and are actually being quite mendacious in the way that the information is spread, particularly some of the tabloid press, because again, it's very adversarial, it's not getting to the truth of it in any way, shape or form, and so, but then it suffers from penultimate paragraph syndrome, which is where you spend the entire article more or less lying and fudging the truth about it, but then in the last two paragraphs, you put a rebuttal from somebody in the government just restating their position that they intend to support the trans community once again. So it's a big old mess, and we've seen it before, and so do be careful. When it comes to...
Do you think there's going to be any kind of repercussions for this kind of reporting? Like, do you think there's going to be an uptick in people being turned away from changing rooms and stuff like that?
I mean, you can't deny it's a possibility, unfortunately. And it's very difficult to say, oh, well, this man read this article and that's what caused him to be a dick to a trans person at work, because chances are, if you've got it, if you're the sort of person that's going to be a dick to a trans person, that's going to have been there anyway, but you'll just feel validated in doing so. Much like racists felt invalidated right after the vote to leave the EU. They said, oh, yes, great, it's open season now, and racist attacks went up by quite a lot. Homophobic attacks went up as well, because these people felt emboldened, and that is what I worry about. And the thing that would stop that would be, let's stop this kind of awful coverage, but I'm not sure if we're going to see that, unfortunately. I mean, there has been pushback against this coverage. There have been letters to the editor and so on. I've written some of them myself, but you can spend your entire life knocking your head against a brick wall in that way, and it doesn't seem like anything is really realistically done. So
yeah, I don't really want to sound like I'm defending the journalists in this, but I've worked in a newsroom before.
No, I know, they're just churning this shit out. No one checks anything.
Yeah, it's like you said. Basically, one person reported it, and then everybody repeated it because they've got to do like a certain number of stories every few hours. So
I know that's how it works. It's just it sucks. So
yeah. That's a major problem with the whole fucking industry right now.
It's not just a problem with within the media or any given industry. Actually, the problem being that it just sucks generally is applied to a number of quarters of life at the moment. But let's move on from all those, shall we?
Yeah. Okay. Let's do some gender pop culture disordering of some kind.
Yes.
So
yes,
Ashley, you have been reading books like a cave person.
I have. Yes, like an ancient scholar. Yeah, so I'm reading 2 books this week, both of which I bought last week and haven't had time to finish either of them, which is fine. So one of them is non-fiction and the other one is some lovely magical realism fiction. So which do you fancy first?
I don't know, Ash. Where do you want to start?
Let's start with some queer sex, shall we?
Oh, okay.
Which is the top. Yes, it's terribly titillating. No, so this is the new book by Juno Roche, right? So she's a writer, she's written a few books before, and is also a campaigner. She's a trans woman, she's absolutely awesome. I think I met her briefly at a Pride event once, and was like, oh my god, you're awesome. So this is her new book, it's great. And it is, it's about sex, as you might imagine. So I've got to caveat this by saying I've only read sort of into a third of this, because I picked up this book, and then I got the one I'm going to talk about next, and I've been reading that one before this one because that one is just so good. But it's about sex and relationships, but from like an unabashedly queer perspective. It's not about trying to put people into a box to say, to be a trans woman you have to be interested in this and the other. It's just about a different spectrum of people, and Juno has travelled around and interviewed, a good number of different activists. So there's Fox, Fisher, and Owl, who are in the chapter I have just sort of started reading, and it's great. And honestly, even though I've really only read the start of it, it's such a relief to read it, to know that it's there, right? I could just walk into a branch of Waterstones and get this. I didn't have to order it through Gaze the Word or mail order or anything like that. I could just go in and buy it. So awesome, we've progressed to that point now, and that books like this even exist. This is the sort of book I could have done with when I was 15 or 16.
So is it like an exploration of the many different forms that queer sex can take, or is it a more personal thing? Or
it is. So it started off obviously with quite a personal story about Juno, about her transition, and about getting to grips with her body post changes of transition, and so it starts off quite personal, but it then is also asking, I suspect, personal questions about queer sex life and how it's done to all of the people who are also interviewed in the book. So, again, I apologise for not having finished it, but I've had a lot on. But I am looking forward to reading the rest of it once I have finished our second tome of the week. So this is a book that was published in 2016 by Anna Marie McLemore, and it's called When the Moon Was Ours. And as I mentioned, it's definitely got elements of what we probably call magical realism. It's not it's not a police procedural, gritty type story. It's set in a world where there do seem to be magical elements, and it is really, really lovely. And so I'm about sort of halfway into this book, and the story is just lovely. There's some lovely imagery, and I said, oh, well, a lot of the imagery is quite floral to my flatmate, and they were like, oh, well, that's the problem with a lot of Victorian books, isn't it? A lot of the language is really florid, there's a lot going on, and it kind of obscures the point of the book. what's trying to be said. And it's like, oh no, I don't mean that. I just mean all of the visual imagery in the words is flowers and branches, petals and roses particularly. But in it, just one of the characters, one of the main two characters, is a transgender person, and so the themes of them existing in this world are explored. Again, I'm not aware of the denouement of this, but I'm very much looking forward to reading the rest of it. And it's been so highly spoken of by people that I like and respect, is why I went out and got it, and it does look to be living up to expectations. It's beautiful. So, yes, check that one out if you can.
High literature with a trans person in it, which I can't remember the last time that's happened.
It's some proper literature. It really is. It's very, very nice. But anyway, so let's move on from these dry and dusty librarian tomes. So, what's the latest evidence in trans people taking over the media? What have you been looking at?
Well, I've been watching a lot of screens recently. First up, we've got Bride and Prejudice. It's a Channel 4 show. It's a sort of documentary bit of prejudice porn, where it follows couples who are going off and getting married, much to the objections of friends and family who may have issues with the relationships. For example, and they've got a couple of LGBT couples who some parents and family members are not particularly down with the lifestyle, etc. And one of the couples is Shaba and Jamie. Jamie is a trans man, and Shaba's mum, the mother of the bride, has certain issues with that, and they sort of go into how they sort of unpack and unravel and all of those issues around that. And it's pretty good. I mean, it's an okay show, like, just quality wise, and it's quite interesting, but also, I don't know, it's a bit, you're going to see a lot of Jamie and Shaba's mum just talking about the ins and outs of being trans, and you're going to see a lot of shots of Jamie just being a bit down about it, just like, why can't she accept me? But again, with the case with many of these kinds of shows is that they didn't make this with trans people in mind. This is very much for your average consumer, your average viewer who will watch it, and I'm convinced that they will come on the side of Jamie in this, because Jamie is like this lovely guy who, weirdly, I first stumbled across many years ago. You know, I was first coming out, I went on YouTube and looked at, like, a lot of people at the time were doing sort of take a picture a day through their transition, so they could mark how different the different effect of the hormones. And I found his. I saw him transform from, what he was before to what he is now. And then suddenly he's on TV in front of me. And that was a really odd thing. But yeah, Jamie's great. The show's okay. I think it's going to... I don't think it's necessarily going to be a stain on trans representation. So yeah, check it out if that's your thing. Moving on very quickly to Queer Eye, which I gushed about last time. I was really looking forward to this episode that was going to feature a trans man. Just to summarise what Queer Eye is very quickly, if you people didn't listen last week. 5 gay guys rock up in someone's town, and they sort of do up their life. They find someone who's in a rut, and they try and turn it round by, changing their look, doing up their house, teaching them how to cook a few recipes, how to enrich their life in various different ways. And it sounds like on paper that is exactly what certain trans people may need. This episode that features a trans guy called Skylar, who's amazing. I love Skylar. He is a very young trans man living in Georgia in America, which sounds like a fucking nightmare, but he has made the best of it. He has lots of queer friends. He has a little queer enclave that sort of came together and helped him get top surgery and stuff to cover the cost of that. But the show itself, again, it's very much made for the layperson to come in as the trans episode. Like, usually in an episode they'll have somebody, usually a guy, but not always, who has a certain issue that he has to overcome. Like in one episode, there's a guy who keeps referring to himself as, you can't fix ugly. And the whole episode is basically about him trying to get some self-confidence. This is very much the trans episode. They basically trans every 2 seconds. This guy is a man. He's a manly man. He's a man. And that can be a bit that can be a bit of an oversimplification of the complexity of transgender of trans people. But
oh, you think?
Yeah, I do think. And the show does fuck up in a few places. It opens and concentrates too much on his top surgery, I think. But then also he's just had the top surgery, so you can see kind of how they did it. There's been a little bit of pushback from trans guys in the community. But I think that overall it's going to do more good than harm when it comes to the cis people watching.
Sadly, that's the case for a lot of
But I was a little disappointed.
That's the problem. So many of these things can feel quite exploitative, but at the same time, it is good to see the stories being told in some way. But I do just wish there was less of a focus on that surgery, and it's like rather than dwelling on the surgery itself, rather than, why not talk about the broader the broader points of the experience, why somebody would pursue surgery, and the dysphoria perhaps that you experience that necessitates it. Like delve into those experiences.
Oh, they do go into that in the show. There is one person, I can't remember his name now, but he's basically the fashion guy who comes in and just like gets them all suited and booted and what have you. He comes into it saying, "I've never met a trans person," and I was very quick to say that you know of.
Yes.
Like, he's like a gay guy who's been alive for a while. I'm pretty sure at some point he's run into a few trans people, but whatever.
Sure,
so
we'll go
they
with
kind
that.
of frame him as the one who's on sort of the learning quest. He's on the quest to understand, and he's not. Nobody in it's hateful. They all are very down with it. Like the guy who does the hair, again, I can't remember his name. He just cuts straight to it and is fantastic. Just like, right, well, here's the deal. I've been reading up a lot about hormones, and basically they can do this to your skin. So I'm going to recommend, in the meantime, whilst your skin acclimatizes to your new hormone regime, that you do this, this, and this. And he's very straightforward and very lovely about it. And he's not obsessed with the idea of trans, but he sort of comes at it at a very practical way, which is really lovely to see.
That's what you want, really.
Yeah, whereas there was the guy who basically guts the house, who was just kept like I was very like he did up the house, and his thing was just like, right, he's a man. I'm gonna make this the manliest house in the world. This is gonna be man. I was shocked to discover that he didn't actually put in like a whiskey bar or pictures of racing cars on the wall or something like that. But yeah, so I if you couldn't tell, I'm very mixed about it. I really love the show, and I would encourage everyone to watch it because it is heartwarming. And there are points in this show which did almost bring me to tears in a good way, but also
it's not perfect.
Come in with certain expectations. It's not perfect by a long way. And to finish off very quickly, because I just watched this afternoon, Matty Barton, played by Ash Palmiciano, has arrived in Emmerdale. For people that don't know, people who may be listening abroad, Emmerdale is like a nightly soap opera that is very popular in the UK, set in sort of my home area of Yorkshire. They used to film it just down the road from where I used to live when I was growing up.
Right.
And it's a very soap opera thing. Soap operas, I'm going to come out and say it, soap operas are not my thing. Like, I've recently been watching a lot of Breaking Bad with my mum because she missed it, and it's a crime that she hadn't seen it. And yeah, so I've been watching a lot of this show where the characters react to events. You always see why a character acts a certain way, and the character is more than the things they say. The characters are very much what they do, and it's we know what Breaking Bad is. It's like golden age of TV, one of the best shows ever made. And so then I come into Emmerdale, which is a soap opera that is filmed very quickly, written very quickly, and we all know what a soap opera is. It's a bunch of people talking about the plot in different rooms. That's what it is. And on those terms, Ash does an incredible job. The 40-minute episode that he is in, he comes into it, and you immediately feel that I immediately felt when he came into it that I was just like, I'm on his side. Like, because before that it was 30 minutes of a bunch of people I've never heard of talking about things I didn't really care about, and then he came in and just like, oh my god, I love him. And on those terms, on soap opera terms, he did a fantastic job. And whilst, like I've just said, the writing necessarily isn't to my taste, I went with it. The main plot that I think is going to come out from this is that basically Matty's mum is not particularly down with the trans thing, but not entirely because of that, but because Matty has been busy off transitioning in Manchester and missed out on a particularly hellish year in her life. Like, her son died, I believe, at some point, and Matty did not come to the funeral because he was busy, transitioning and being a scared, alone trans person in Manchester, which I'm pretty sure a lot of trans people listening will be able to empathise with that.
I see.
Yeah, he didn't know exactly when to drop the bombshell that he was trans, so he stayed away. So I think that's where the narrative is going to go over the next few episodes. They're going to just like deal with that.
I can certainly empathise with that. So
they didn't focus on anything that made me go, eh. They didn't do any of the things like they didn't do any of the things on paper that were wrong. Like Queer Eye did. Like surgery didn't come up. Like he referenced hormones, but it was more matter of fact. Like honestly, I think I came away from it thinking it was pretty good. But I'm not really a big soap opera fan, so I think I'd probably refer you to like the Professionals, of Digital Spy, and people like that who have written plenty of pieces about like how good it was to how good an example of representation it is. So yeah. Oh, and one last thing. One very, very quick last thing, and then we can move on. There's a show right now out in America called Pose. About it's got 5 trans people in it playing trans characters. I have not been able to watch as much of this as I would have liked because it is currently only available in the US, but I have watched various bits here and there. And basically, it's about in America. I'm not sure if this is the case here, but in a lot of queer people of color communities, there's this ballroom culture where different houses sort of compete in sort of costume cabaret style face-offs, and basically it's all about Blanca, a transgender woman who leaves her home house to start her own, and she's trying to build a house for herself. And it's set in the 80s, about the queer community and it's also got characters that work for the Trump company in it. So I think it's going to go down that route of like seeing how one affects the other and how one potentially gobbles up the other. But yeah, when that comes to the UK, I will totally go to town on that for you, and I will bring you up all the news of when it actually gets here. But be on the lookout for that. That is coming, and that Janet Mock helps write it. It's made by the guy who made Glee and all of that stuff. So he's had a few bit problematic aspects in the past, but if anyone is going to get this kind of thing right, I'm pretty sure it's going to be him and his cohort, Ryan Murphy. So yeah, check that out. And that's me done. I'm done now.
Are you done?
I'm done.
You're done. All right. Good stuff. Excellent. Gosh, so there's so much television. I didn't realise, but then of course there would be. There's just so many channels. Anyway, wonderful.
Well, I think it's just in the last 5 years or so, trans people have sort of become more prominent. So yeah, I think this is only going to happen more and more.
That's true. It's true. We're gonna need a bigger show, aren't we? Anyway,
gonna need a bigger show.
Yeah. So anyway, up next is our So up next is a section that we really should give a proper intro to, but for the moment we just go for the hot take. And so on the hot take, what we do is we go into something in a little bit of detail and we give our own little, hot take on it. And this week, according to the World Health Organization, we're not crazy anymore. Yay! And there was much rejoicing. So what does this mean?
Well, basically, the World Health Organization is no longer classifying transgender people as having a mental health disorder on its own. So, being trans, when it comes to the World Health Organization, being transgender is not a mental health condition. And they have done this, basically, by just changing where it shows up in their international classification of diseases. They used to call it gender identity disorder, now they call it gender incongruence. That's how they refer to being trans. They used to have that in the mental disorders section, and they have moved it to the sexual health category instead. And the hopes are that by doing this, it will allow trans people to seek out more appropriate healthcare.
Because, I think it's quite important to point this out, is that as a trans person going to see somebody, particularly in terms of a mental health disorder, just immediately brings them to talking about it as if it's a subset or as if it's specifically related to you being trans, right? So, and you actually find this in a lot of other medical settings as well. So there's a thing called diagnostic overshadowing, or as we call it, trans broken arm syndrome. And this is where you go into the doctors with literally a broken arm, and they will in some way try and link it to your hormones or therapy or the fact that you are trans, and that is the cause of the thing. A friend of mine went to an ear, nose and throat specialist because she had a persistent sore throat and received a doses of transgender problems.
She had a case of trans nose.
Yeah, basically that's.
I don't even want to know. I don't even want to think about what trans nose would be.
I mean, there's not even. The point is that it's not even a real thing. So, by this being constantly the thing that is focused on in physical, sexual, and mental health, does come with its own pitfalls, and the fact that society is so hostile to trans people, on the whole. I don't think it's going too far to say that. One of the reasons that the WHO have done this is, as they've said, to reduce the social stigma. So rather than having attached to it this idea that, trans people are all crazy, and we can safely dismiss them, rather than that, we've got this idea that actually, no, this is just a thing that happens like any other thing that happens, and it's not related specifically to mental health. The mental health problems come in from living in that hostile society and having your existence and your identity debated in public newspapers, and a whole question mark over whether you can use public bathrooms before too long, and no representation.
I've actually had this sort of happen. You just talking about it then, it just brought back to me this time when I was going to therapy because, like, I have, or I kind of have, I've turned the corner on it, a major anxiety disorder for a long time. For about 2 years, I was as ableist as it may sound, but I don't know any other way to describe it quickly. I was nuts, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went to I had to go to an assessment before they let me have proper therapy, so I sat down with this woman, and I was talking to her about all the things that, like, scared the crap out of me, all the things that worried me all the time, and she was just like, so, how do your genitals come into this? And I was like, I don't know. They're there when I'm worrying about this other thing that isn't my genitals. Like, they tend to be in the same room as me when I'm worrying. And she was like, and then she was like, I'm feeling that you some hostility from you now. And I'm like, well, it's just because I don't want to talk about my bits right now.
That's not.
She's like, well, I think this is something we should explore. And I was like, can we explore the 10 other things I was already fucking talking about, you genius? Like, I don't.
Okay.
I'm anxious now about my genitals because you're talking about them. I don't. It's just so odd when you were saying that. It's just like, I've seen that in action happen right in front of my fucking eyes, and it was horrible.
That doesn't sound like much fun, but and a lot of trans people have similar stories, to be honest, or some experience or other, which is just like, no, stop talking about that. That's not what this is about. And so, I do welcome this move from the WHO, specifically, but it's got attached to it the statement that it is about reducing a stigma. But then there is always that subset of people as well who just assume that anybody with a mental illness at all is just like, oh, well, they're just making it up, they're just malingering, and as limited as those people are now, predominant as it was in the 16th century, at the moment we have a slightly more enlightened understanding of mental illness, in that yes, it is a real thing, and it is something that can deeply, deeply affect somebody in their life, and all of that other stuff. And so those people are also usually in the camp of trans people are just making it up, and or they're crazy. So they've got us coming and going. We're either making it up or crazy, or we're making it up about being crazy, or we're making up the being crazy. Or it's like, there is no way that we can win. But so this, hopefully, might reduce some of that stigma and might, cause some healthcare providers who aren't doing it right to say, okay, well, I guess I should get over myself then. Not that I've ever known a doctor who would ever say that to themselves, but
I think the thing that needs to be said is that there are a lot of people out there who seem to think that this decision was made because of some kind of campaign or an SJW reaction of some kind, that they were trying to get the SJ was off their backs, and that is incredibly not the case. So whilst one of the aims was to remove stigma around transgender people, that was not the only or even main reason. Like, Jeffrey Reed, who is the professor of clinical psychology at Columbia University and was a chief consultant to the new section of the code, told Pink News the intention is to reduce barriers to care. It's sending a very strong message that the rest of the world is no longer considering it a mental disorder. One of the benefits of moving it out of mental disorder section is trying to reduce stigma, but also putting it in the right part of the book means that people will look at the right section of potential ways to treat these issues, which I think is by far the most important thing. And it didn't come out of nowhere. Like, 31 countries have been participating in this, in certain studies and surveys for the last 5 years, and over nearly 1,500 odd people have been participating in various ways. Like, there was one study out of Mexico that basically was the most compelling when I was looking into it, that made the point that the reason trans people may suffer for higher rates of mental health issues is not because of the trans component. It's because of, like you said, the life horror component that can come with it.
Yeah, the everybody else thing. And, far be it from me to say that, the problem is cis people, but the problem really is cis people. So all of that stuff about where you're discriminated against and you feel unsafe using public bathrooms, and you maybe lose friends and family, you might lose a support network, you might not be supported by your employer, you might have troubles finding a house, private landlord or whatever. All of these things actually can add up to a very legitimate kind of stress. And there's a documented condition called minority stress, isn't there? Which this is not just applying to the LGBT community here, whereby people who have barriers to healthcare or to housing or education or any barrier placed in their way of free and open access to society causes an undue amount of stress and anxiety in those people who are worrying how they're going to go on, how they're going to provide for themselves, or perhaps their families, how they're going to feed and clothe themselves. That stuff stresses you out. It causes anxiety every time you go outside if you're not sure if you're going to get something thrown at you. You know, so this stuff adds up and it matters, and that is what is causing the majority of, as you say, the mental health issues within the trans community.
Yeah, like I've known this, I've seen this in my own life to a hell of an extent. Like, because in my history, like where my anxiety disorder and all of that stuff came from, was sort of death by 1,000 cuts. It wasn't just one thing. Like my last big crisis I had, oh wow, a very long time ago.
But that's good though.
Yeah, very good. I've come a long way. That's part of the reason why I'm able to do this now. There was no way I could do this podcast a year ago. I was not with it. But it was always lots of little things like, you know, oh, that person there shouted something at me in the street. Oh, the Big Bang Theory just did a joke about how sleeping with trans people is disgusting. Oh, look, Trump got elected. Oh, look, my uncle isn't particularly down with this. Or, oh, this. And they all built up and contributed to my deteriorating mental health to the point where I had to have medical intervention.
I remember.
And that medical intervention wasn't exactly perfect at times because a lot of the focus was on the trans stuff and not, you know, any of the other stuff. Like, it took me a long time to find the right people to sort of give me the appropriate help, which I've had for the last year, and I'm doing a million times better than I was. But yeah, this is something that obviously is very close to my heart, and I'm pretty sure will be close to your heart for the same rough reasons. Like, I'm pretty sure every trans person has gone through that period where things have gotten very dark, not because of something in them, but because of external factors.
Yeah, no, I know exactly of what you speak. So, and it's important that in every way that an organisation can, you know, steps are taken to, you know, take those barriers away and to provide appropriate assistance and care to trans people the same as any other members of the community. And so this is sending a strong message, and you know, more like this. Hopefully, yes, maybe we shall see some more of this.
Yeah, I think right now, basically, they've done the change. They have changed where it's placed in the ICD, but they're going to make their formal announcement at like next year at their big global event that WHO has every year, and then in 2022 is when it will officially become policy. So I guess that means we're still crazy a bit.
Yeah.
Like, bureaucratically crazy up until 2022, where we'll suddenly magically stop being crazy.
That sounds good. So we've got sort of 3 and a bit years to really wallop.
Make the most of it, I guess.
I was just thinking, how do we really make the most of it, considering that it nearly killed us both?
I don't know. We can just go to just take advantage of this and just start staring at people on buses and just being all crazy bag ladies on the bus or whatever.
Get a lot of cats in.
Yes, exactly. Well, I would like to quickly go through some numbers of just how significant minority stress and all of that kind of stuff is having on the trans community. Looked up a whole bunch of numbers from research by PACE, an LGBT mental health charity, who, in partnership with Brunel University, did a mass study, one of the biggest of its kind when it comes to trans people. Young trans people, and they came up with some shocking statistics. 48% of trans people under 26 have attempted suicide. 30% have said they've tried it in the preceding 12 months, and 59% have considered it. And you compare that with only, I say that in inverted commas because this is still too many, only 6% of all 16 to 24-year-olds have attempted suicide, which is, I mean, the 6% is shocking in itself, but then with trans people, 48%.
Yeah, that's so again nearly half, and that's not good at all. And obviously, I remember what it was like to be trans at that age, and it wasn't much fun. And you know, that was just with stuff in the 90s. That was before Twitter and Facebook and a constant barrage of insults. But you know what coverage and conversation there was around trans people, particularly in the media, in the early 90s, was pretty rubbish, pretty awful.
It would be it's a very different thing for us.
It is,
compared to them. Like with our thing, we were very much alone in small towns, I imagine, just clawing up the walls, not even knowing the words to describe what was going on.
Yes.
So I'm not exactly sure we could ever really compare the two and see which one was worse, but we can agree that
Oh no, and I'm not trying to do that, Jesus.
Oh, I know. I know.
awful.
I wasn't going down that route, Ash. I would never say that. You know that.
But literally, it must be so hard to be that age and going through this and seeing this. It's just anyway. Yes. So did you have any more observations from the stats there from Pace?
I think we've pretty much covered everything apart from, get help, people. You know what I mean? Go out like the with this kind of thing. Healthcare stuff is getting better, and like I have had my issues with the NHS in this country, but they have really helped me. And go get your cervix checked. Go get your brain checked. You deserve to be in the world. Go out, be amazing, and tell your friends about this podcast.
Yeah, that would be super as well. But absolutely, definitely, please stay healthy. So moving on to charging towards the very last bit of the show, and our penultimate section is the dickhead dispatches. Yes. So this is sort of like naming and shaming, but it's more just like, God, look at these people. What assholes. And this week, I'm thinking it's people who lie in the media about the Gender Recognition Act. What do you think?
Yeah, they are very much dickheads. They are bastards, dickheads, and bastards.
And like that, legitimately is seemingly causing some problems, particularly in terms of the rhetoric. Even if the government are just sitting there patiently repeating its position in the voice of someone who's quite prepared to repeat themselves until everybody else gets bored and goes home. So that is more or less the conclusion of the show. But we like to end on a note of light, and so. Michelle, you've been having some thoughts about our icon of the week, haven't you?
Yes, I'm thinking our heroes and our icons this week are going to be Skylar from Queer Eye for being a fucking legend, and
yes,
flying the flag so charmingly and wonderfully, and also the Who for, while some may say they're a bit late compared to other people, I'm just very, very happy that they got there, and this is going, and their reclassification of transgender issues not as a mental health condition but as sexual health issues is going to have wide-reaching positive benefits for the global trans community. So God bless, thank you, and yes.
And so that about wraps it up for God. No, I'm kidding. So that simply wraps up our show. Thank you so much for putting up with us, and I do hope you'll continue to stick with this podcast as we get slightly better at doing it more or less every week.
So I think follow us on Twitter at WhatTheTrans. You can check out our website, whatthetrans.wordpress.com, and catch us again in 2 weeks, where hopefully we'll be back on schedule. And also come check us out at Trans Pride when that happens. Ash, when's Trans Pride?
So that's going to be taking place on the weekend of the 21st and 22nd of July all over Brighton. You and I are going to be there. We're going to have tremendous fun sleeping on people's sofas and wandering around taking it all in. I so rarely get...
And probably handing out far too many leaflets. We're going to be those people, I think.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to annoy the bejesus out of probably everybody, but then I guess that's how you do these things. But we have another show to get out of the way, another show perhaps to get out of the way before then, and the next one, we're going to have tremendous fun, because that's going to be reporting on both Sparkle in Manchester and Michelle's jaunty birthday experience at London Pride. Won't that be one?
Not going to lie, I don't think it's going to be the most professional moment of my podcasting career, mostly because I'm just going to be wandering around the women's stage going, please talk to me, come, look, I've got a phone, talking to my phone about this.
And, yes, and we can all look forward to that. Sounds great. Okay, so that's the end of the show. We're going to sign off now. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, see you next time.
Bye-bye.